A single jam in the street turned an armored column into a funeral line, and that is where this story begins. Russian T-80 tanks and BMPs drove in with confidence, infantry on the armor and artillery thundering behind. But the ground itself had changed. Eyes in the sky were already drawing a trap. What followed was not luck. It was a cheap, fast kill chain that punished every mistake in seconds. Wires and waves replaced weight and noise, and one blocked vehicle became a deadlock that invited fire from every angle. Engines burned, tracks snapped, and trained crews ran, because tempo, not tonnage, now decides who holds a street and who loses a day. If that balance can flip in minutes, imagine what happens when the same method scales across a city block, a supply route, or a week of attacks. Stay to the end and see why this isn't a highlight reel. It's a map for the next fight. Like, share, and subscribe to Military Force if you want clear maps, plain numbers, and field-level breakdowns without the noise. Russia attacks on this axis with a textbook armored approach, as T-80 tanks lead, BMP carriers trail with dismounts, troops ride on the hulls for quick action, and tube artillery beats a steady rhythm from the rear. This method aims to push fighting men close to houses and road bends, then plant a foothold inside the built-up area before defenders can reset. The formation stretches in a long file because roads, tree lines, and drainage ditches narrow the room for vehicles, so spacing matters for blast safety yet still keeps radios and eyes linked. Commanders prefer a strong point up front, since a heavy tank can eat initial fire, clear soft barricades, and create space for carrier teams to follow, while gunners behind throw smoke and high explosive to cover each bound. Crews add rooftop cages, side skirts, and improvised frames to blunt top attack hits, and they stack sandbags, rubber mats, or wired panels to absorb fragments. Yet those kits do little for mobility parts like tracks, idlers, or road wheels. Soldiers ride outside to see threats early, to jump off fast near the last corner, and to give the lead vehicle extra lookouts, although exposed riders face airburst shards and low-flying drones. The file relies on momentum, because speed shortens the time under angle fire and compresses the defender's kill window, while the tail vehicles keep pressure so that the middle does not stall. Fire support tries to pin known firing points with timed salvos, and forward observers mark fresh targets with quick reports, but concrete walls, sheds, and garden plots break lines of sight and bend fragments away from key angles. When the lead tank slows for a turn, the whole string compresses, mirrors overlap, and turret arcs narrow, which is why even a brief stop can ripple backward and create blind zones. Urban choke points multiply these risks because parked cars, collapsed fences, and narrow alleys reduce bypass options, and a single disabled hull can block two directions at once. At that moment, the plan depends on recovery gear, smoke, and a clean lane to swing around the obstacle. Yet such tools rarely sit in the exact spot where they are needed most. Artillery doctrine assumes the spear keeps moving, so pre-planned fire lifts in stages. But if the spear pauses, gaps open between where shells land and where armor now sits. Electronic warfare on the Russian side can jam cheap radios and dull some drone feeds, though jammers also reveal themselves and still cannot protect every block at the same time. Short-range air defense rides with the column to swat small threats, yet those crews must choose between watching the sky and scanning side streets, and they often do both at half strength. The net result is a force designed to hit hard in a straight push, which works best on open ground and wide roads, but grows fragile when the front vehicle meets a sudden hazard and the rest has no clean room to flow. That is exactly the seam a planned mine ambush can pry open, and it is the reason a drone laid belt before H-hour can flip control of the first contact. Ukrainian scouts set the trap with a purpose-built drone that lays mines before H-hour, and this forces the Russian column to drive into a kill zone already mapped from the sky. The method is simple but sharp, because recon first studies traffic habits, road width, and cover lines, then marks the likely lane where a lead tank will choose the smoothest turn. The drone flies low, stays under heavy radar, and drops compact charges along the verge, on culverts, and near corners that squeeze tracks into one line. Crews on the ground confirm angles with handheld feeds, so the belt is not random. It is tied to places where drivers reduce speed and mirrors draw close. When steel meets pressure plates, the blast cuts suspension parts and throws road wheels off, and a single hit can freeze a carrier in the worst spot for everyone behind. In the footage that shaped this plan, 2 BMPs blew up almost back-to-back, so the formation lost rhythm and dust clouds exposed the route to every camera that mattered. That instant creates a fix, because vehicles in the middle must choose between ramming a wreck, reversing blind under stress, or halting in a file that grows longer by the second. A long file is bad in any town, yet it turns fatal near a choke point, since turret arcs overlap and gunners cannot see around the dead hull in front. Mine laying by drone scales well, as one team can seed multiple bends in minutes, while a truck crew would need hours and would risk counter battery on open ground. The cost balance also tilts, because a few smart drops can burn far more fuel and time than a day of random shelling, and commanders feel that pressure as radios fill with confused calls. Engineers can sweep a lane with rollers or plows, but those tools work best in open fields, and urban edges chew up their space, so even a cleared stripe may still funnel armor into a tight turn that favors defenders. Russia adds rooftop cages and skirts to blunt top-attack hits, yet those kits do not shield tracks or idlers, and the mine shock still shatters small parts that matter for movement. Jammers can disrupt cheap links, although the mine belt does not depend on a live signal once it is down, and a silent trap waits all night with the same lethal result. The smartest detail is timing, because laying happens close enough to the operation that crews cannot receive a warning, and far enough ahead that watch posts do not catch the drone team. Mapping apps, tire marks, and past convoy videos help predict the exact curb where the lead driver will hug the inside line, and that is where a shaped charge does its worst work. The first explosion breaks confidence, the second blocks the lane, and the third freezes the tail, so the battlefield shrinks to a few meters of bad pavement. Once the column is fixed and the route is clear to every sensor, the fight shifts from breaking movement to finishing metal, which is where the FPV teams take over the hunt. Ukrainian FPV teams now shift from quick hits to guided hunts, and they use that change to turn a moving threat into a fixed target in seconds. They start with a mobility kill, because a shaped charge into the tracks or a blast near the idler locks the suspension, and a heavy hull that cannot steer becomes a marker that helps every other shooter. Crews often bail when the first strike stops the carrier, since smoke, alarms, and a stalled engine cut awareness, and fear grows fast when side streets are tight and sightlines are short. Hunters then move to the finish, as a second FPV dives on the engine deck or slips through rear grills, and hot oil, severed cables, and broken pumps make a clean fire that climbs fast. If flames do not start at once, pilots angle for the ammo space, because stored propellant and loose rounds ignite when fragments pierce cases, and a sharp cook-off turns steel into wreckage. AI tracking helps the chase stay tight, even when the driver jerks the wheel or throws smoke, since the guidance learns the silhouette and keeps the nose on target through small course changes. Pilots also stack routes, as one vehicle flies a low line along walls while another stays high for a steep entry, and that mix denies the gunner a single arc to cover. The timing matters as much as aim, because the second pass should arrive before the crew resets, and coordinated calls on short radios keep the gap narrow between the first stop and the final hit. A good team exploits angles that tanks rarely guard, like the thin plate over the engine, the vents near cooling fans, and the seam where the rear meets the side, and these weak points give light warheads outsized effect. Even heavy cages help little once the tracks are gone, as improvised frames protect the roof from a straight plunge, but cannot shield vents or keep flames from spreading under the deck. Short-range air defense struggles in these moments, since gunners must scan roofs and alleys at once, and each second spent finding a buzzing speck is a second not spent covering a friend. Engineers with tow gear can save a stuck hull on open ground, yet in a narrow lane the recovery truck has no room to angle in, and every delay turns a lane into a wall. Field clips often show the sequence running fast, as the gap between stop and fire is measured in a brief window, and that speed is what steals initiative from the attackers. The real gain is control of space, because one disabled vehicle blocks two directions, and a burning engine masks the street with thick smoke that favors the side with better sensors. Once the column is fixed and the first hull burns, the fight shifts from single targets to shaped zones of fire, and that is the cue for mapped guns to work the grid that the drones have just drawn. Russia drives a T-80 with a mine plow and 3 BMPs straight into a tight neighborhood, and Ukraine answers with a simple chain that bites hard. A Mavic spots, a 152mm battery ranges in, and one FPV lights the lead hull to lock the street. The topic is control of space, because a single burning tank turns a two-lane road into a dead end, and every vehicle behind must choose between ramming steel, reversing blind, or sitting under fire. Spotters keep the drone low, read roof lines, and send clean grids, while gunners adjust in short steps until splash and flash line up, and that economy of corrections cuts the window for any rescue try. The first hit matters most, since a thermal plume over the engine deck tells crews the plow cannot save momentum inside alleys, and a mine roller that works in fields loses value when curbs, fences, and parked vans pinch tracks into one path. Pilots steer the FPV along walls to hide in clutter, then swing behind the turret ring, and a shaped charge into vents sets fluids on fire, so the lead T-80 loses power and smoke pours across the block. Artillery shifts to a time-on-target rhythm once the plume marks the choke point, and 3 guns walk shells down the file because bracketing from near to far breaks nerve and ruins spacing. One BMP takes a direct impact and stops at a junction, and that wreck widens the trap as side streets now collect fragments and force riders to dismount into doorways with poor angles. Infantry scatters into shops, sheds, and stairwells, yet hand signals and short radios fight echoes, and squads lose track of who covers which corner, while cameras in the sky keep counting helmets. Short-range air defense tries to swat the buzzing threat, but turret crews must watch windows and rooftops at the same time, and every pivot of a cannon leaves another arc open to a diving quad. Electronic noise adds chaos without saving steel, since jammers blur weak links, but a parked hull still blocks sight, and smoke that hides defenders also blinds gunners who need a clean lane for a tow. Engineers cannot angle a recovery truck into a boxed turn, so the plan to pull the T-80 clear dies on geometry, and a city grid that looks wide on paper becomes narrow under stress. The battery keeps fire tight, using short bursts and quick lifts to avoid overshoot, and that restraint matters in crowded blocks, because precise salvos help keep civilians out of the cone while pressure stays on the column. Command feels the clock, as the gap between the first engine fire and the second impact is measured in a handful of heartbeats, and each heartbeat steals initiative from the assault. This is the block and harvest method in full. Seal the head, freeze the body, and cut the tail with mapped steel, while drones redraw the grid after every burst to keep angles fresh. With the street locked and morale fading, the only exit is backward through wrecks, and that retreat invites more strikes because dust and brake lights give away each move in real time. This outcome sets up the next turn of the fight, since a larger push will try to force the route again, and that effort will meet massed fires and a deep shot aimed beyond the block. Russia returned the following day with a larger push of more than 10 vehicles, Yet the plan walked into the same geometry, and the trap closed faster than before. That set the stage for the spotting drones to hand over precise grids. Small quadcopters mapped roof lines and poles, then passed coordinates to a 152mm battery that began with short bracketing bursts. The first round landed shallow and threw dust across a doorway, yet splash gave range, and the second shot walked onto the lead BMP with a hard impact that folded track guards. Metal and smoke filled the street. Drivers behind hit brakes and formed a steel chain with no bypass room. Radios spiked with urgent calls. That created a fixed point for follow-on fire to exploit. FPV pilots dove along walls and cut behind stalled armor, and one warhead punched the engine deck of the forward tank, which killed power and lit a dark plume. A dead hull in front and a burning turret beside it turned a two-lane corridor into a locked chute, while side streets offered no angle for recovery gear. Gunners tried short bursts down alley mouths, but each pivot left a gap that a second drone used for a steep entry. With the head sealed in flame, the rest of the file became a bracket for mapped steel. The battery shifted tempo to time-on-target salvos, then walked fire from front to rear in tight steps, and fragments shredded optics and wheels along the stalled line. One carrier took a direct hit at a junction and rolled to a stop across the turn, which widened the block and trapped the middle under overlapping arcs. Crews dismounted into doorways to break line of sight, yet helmets showed in upper windows, and cameras logged every move for the next adjustment. Under that pressure, the assault lost its clock. Command faced a hard choice because pushing forward meant ramming wrecks under drone glare, while reversing invited collisions in a clouded lane. Tow teams could not angle into the box, and short-range air defense split attention between roofs and buzzing specks, which diluted coverage at the worst moment. Jammers added noise, but a blocked road does not care about static, and smoke hid both friend and foe as fire discipline strained. Those seconds turned momentum into delay, and delay turned delay into loss. The pullout began in pieces as tail vehicles tried to back into open ground, and that motion exposed flanks to hidden angles already marked by observers. More FPV hits followed the brake lights, and a few crews abandoned machines that could not turn out of the crush without grinding fenders. Heat from earlier impacts ignited spares and fluids, and secondary flashes raised the risk for any soldier still near the choke point. With the street jammed and morale thin, sensors shifted their focus to the guns behind the fight. A separate ISR track pointed to a self-propelled battery and an ammo site feeding this axis, and planners cued a deep strike to cut support at the root. HIMARS teams received refined coordinates, checked wind and flight windows, and launched a controlled ripple designed to land inside a short span. Infrared signatures spiked as impacts found the stacks, and a rolling detonation rose from the dump, throwing burning debris across revetments and trucks. The loss of shells, cabins, and reload racks trimmed firepower for hours on this sector. The field picture changed at once because Russian guns fell quiet on this corridor, and fresh salvos came late or shifted to safer ranges that had a cramped effect. Wreck counts and burn scars offered early numbers for analysts, while heat plumes and crater sets hinted at the size of the dump and the type of stored rounds. Units on the Ukrainian side used the lull to reset sensors, refill drone racks, and check lanes for fresh obstacles before new pushes could form. This pause mattered for the campaign rhythm, since artillery tempo guides every ground plan on the days that follow. Control goes to the side that closes the sensor-to-shooter loop faster and cheaper, because tempo beats tonnage when streets are narrow and smoke fills the view. Russia will try to thicken low-tier air defense, spread vehicles, and push more jamming, while crews add cages and rollers for confidence, yet those steps trade mass for protection and slow the push. Ukraine will widen approach lanes for drones, seed decoys to split aim, and pair FPV with precise 152mm fire, while deep shots cut guns and dumps that feed the next assault. Watch 4 signals to gauge momentum. Denser FPV routes at roof height, quicker artillery brackets on fresh grids, more reload trucks on SHORAD duties, and new burn scars near rear parks. If these signs line up, the advantage tilts toward the defender, who turns a first stop into a full collapse, and that shift shapes plans for the following day. The lesson is plain yet hard. Mastery of space in seconds decides who holds a block, and cost per hit decides how long that edge lasts. For clear maps, straight numbers, and field-level breakdowns without noise, like, share, and subscribe to Military Force.